All right, so it's time for us to start our next very important panel discussion. So, the next panel discussion is on the topic COVID-19 and remote financial management, CFO managing risks and uncertainties. For this panel discussion, it's time for me to invite our session chair, Mr. Ruhail Amin, Senior Editor, BW Applause and BW Businessworld. And now I would like to invite all our speakers. Can we please have Mr. Deepak Kothari, co-founder and COO, FT Cash, Mr. Ramesh Swaminathan, Executive Director and CFO, Lupin Limited, Mr. Lalit Malik, CFO, Dabur India Limited,
Good afternoon.
Mr. Ajay Agarwal, President and Chief Financial Officer, CNT. Once again, hello everyone, most welcome to this panel discussion.
Hi.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
So, good afternoon. So, Deepak sir, Lalit sir, Ramesh sir. So, just want to know from which all cities you all are. Like right now, where you all are.
Well, I'm based out of
Gurgaon. Lalit sir is in Gurgaon. So, Ramesh sir, where are you?
I'm at Mumbai.
Mumbai. Deepak sir?
Residence at Mumbai.
From Mumbai itself.
Mumbai. Okay. So, how is the climate in Mumbai right now? Is it little cold and how is it?
Pretty warm, actually.
Pretty
Still
warm.
greatly warm.
Okay, okay. And how about Lalit sir? Lalit sir, I really want to know what is the temperature in Delhi like. Is it like in like 5-6 degrees already, or what exactly it is?
I think morning and evenings are cold. They are around 6
Oh.
degrees, but day is quite pleasant.
Oh my God, around 6 degrees. You have no idea, sir. Like all the Mumbai people are totally not used to this kind of climate at all. Oh my God, I'm glad that, I'm sure, the Delhiites have little more immunity than Bombay people. I'm just, assuming it because you are so used to live in such low temperature. So in Bombay, it is.
Well, I am
Yeah.
also brought up in Bombay, but I think I like Delhi cold weather better. It's always
Okay.
pleasant. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's great. So I think it's time for us to start as Rohil sir is already here. Rohil, I would like to give it over to you now. Let's start the discussion.
Thank you so much, Vyoma. I hope I'm audible to all of you.
Yes, very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mr. Kothari, for joining us, and Mr. Swaminathan, Mr. Malik, and Mr. Agarwal. So my first question it would be to Mr. Malik. I want to start with you, sir. Tell me, COVID over the last 9 months has disrupted everything. It has posed challenges and a lot of uncertainties. From a CFO perspective, how have you dealt with these uncertainties?
Sure. So I think you are absolutely right. COVID has been an unprecedented, event or a crisis. Nobody could anticipate that, even though we are all living in VUCA world. So it came as a surprise. But I think all challenges bring in lots of opportunities with it. So a couple of things which actually were good opportunities. Number one, we all learned how to connect remotely, so they were all working from home. So I think the connectivity was the key in that, and technology has played a very important role in facilitating these unprecedented crises. It has brought in a lot of uncertainty, and therefore it is extremely important that one looks at micromanagement, not just the macro management. So rather than talking about strategic long-term planning, it was important to seek opportunity in the challenges that were put in place for all of us. And therefore, managing liquidity became the key important areas for us, whether it is on the working capital or long term. I think that was the most important area. There, as everybody says, cash is king. So therefore, we also focused on that and looked at the opportunity where we were able to facilitate and improve our business, which is on account of healthcare and hygiene sector, and we utilized on that. And another important thing is that we were able to manage all our board meetings and even shareholders meetings also remotely. So I think technology has really helped us to get connected and convert challenges into opportunities and be able to be much more productive, and ensuring that we are able to work as business partners and gain the opportunity or the value addition for our stakeholders.
Right. Mr. Kothari, coming to you with the same question of how you dealt with this unprecedented crisis from a CFO perspective, from a co-founder, I'm sorry, founder and all roles actually included perspective.
So thanks, Rahel. I think I'm in very august company of Mr. Malik and Mr. Swaminathan. We're a much smaller organization. We're a fintech organization. So finance and technology is at the core of our DNA. But I think, like everyone would agree, nobody can say that they were prepared for COVID. Everyone was taken by surprise. The quantum, the scale, the magnitude, and the time with which it has continued is obviously something which nobody had anticipated right at the beginning. What worked for us was obviously that our scale was small, so it allowed us to be agile. We quickly adapted ourselves to working from home. We used technology to make sure that everybody had access to the systems, ability to remote login. I think critical to any CFO, like Mr. Malik mentioned, is cash flow management, making sure that the wheels of business continue to keep moving. Our primary business is also, in fact, focused on providing small merchants access to working capital. While this was a huge requirement in these times, obviously, given the credit risk which had gone up, obviously for the first couple of months, lending had taken a pause. And then over a period of time, as things continued to stabilize, we started resumption of business by focusing first on businesses which were essential in nature, like, the kirana stores, the chemists that needed access to working capital, because all of a sudden, trade terms had changed for quite a few people. When we were talking to folks, who were doing businesses, the same wholesalers, distributors that were earlier providing some working capital were now in a position where they had to shorten their working capitals because of the sudden shock that they had seen to their finances as well. I think essentially what COVID has done is it has given us an opportunity to redesign and remap the whole finance function. So today, even though we're working out of offices, the way we are looking in the future is that it's going to be a mix of work from home and working from office. Nobody can deny the fact that there is an element of benefit when you come into office. But at the same time, I think we've planned now our functions and processes in such a way that even working 2 days a week from office, can allow us to, continue business as usual.
Right. Mr. Swaminathan, from your perspective, tell me your story of the last 9 months.
So, as you would know, the pharmaceutical sector, in the general sense, it is little less, impacted by COVID as compared to other sectors. That's essentially because the government had kind of declared it as an essential commodity industry. But having said that, it's not as it was completely immune. I'll take it in two parts. One is the impact on the finance function itself, and then how has been the impact when it comes to the rest of the business, because the way the business evolves really impacts on finance itself. Firstly, when it comes to impacting the business, it actually impacted in two ways. Firstly, when it comes to supply chain, for example, there was, of course, a shortage of inputs from potentially small scale industries, as in packaging and stuff like that, and this disrupted supply chain in some ways. The second part is, of course, at some point there was also this clamor about clamping down on coming on imports from China, and that impacted us in some ways. The third, of course, this industry relies a lot on calling on doctors, and potentially that meant you had medical representatives who could call on doctors because doctors were not seeing patients, and of course they were not seeing the medical representatives also. So you had to find newer ways of actually communicating with doctors, detailing your products and the like. It gave us opportunities to perhaps focus on cost. As with others in the industry, we had begun on our digital journey much before, but it actually gave us an opportunity kind of to expedite things on various counts. So you went down the path of looking at new ways of promoting things to the doctors and a host of stuff. So essentially, it went in for telemedicine. It became the order of the day. Potentially, the way you actually detail our products, or for that matter, even getting into continuous education for doctors. How do you actually manage that? So that was something which was unique. It also gave us an opportunity to revisit costs based on when it comes to sales and promotion expenses, and see if it could be drawn down, not merely in India but in other parts of the globe as well, particularly in Mexico, in the specialty business in America, and the like. But if you look at the finance function itself, I would say things are normal in lots of ways. So of course, it's newer ways of looking at things. Potentially, for example, we did close an audit. And if you go down that path, we were able to even take a physical stock take using drones and the like. I guess in industries which were into mining and the like, they would have used geospatial technologies to do their fixed assets counting and the like. But having said that, if you look at the CFO's function itself, the CFO does four things. First is looking at the stewardship and custodial functions, protection of assets. So as I said, you use technologies like drones or geospatial to make sure that there's integrity of data in terms of the figures that you report on the balance sheet, in terms of the assets that you report and the like. The CFO, in a general sense, also kind of releases value through simplification of processes, and emphasis on processes, on emphasis on technology, allowed you to actually experiment with newer processes for potentially simplifying things as well. The government itself is also looking at a host of measures and on the score, including the e-invoicing and so on, which obviously brings in a lot of changes in its wake. The third most important thing is adding value to the business, which I think is a very important CFO function. And we all started on this digital process, the digital ways of looking at things, digital analytics and the like. And this got expedited during this period. The fourth function that the CFO does is to communicate value. And that went on as usual. So you had virtual, meetings, road shows with investors and the like, the way you actually do your investor calls and so on in the last 9 months. That function didn't change, but the fact is you did it very differently. You also used a lot of social media to kind of communicate messages and the like. The essentials of the CFO function has not changed, but the way you actually use technology, adapt to it to do the same stuff has obviously gone through some huge metamorphosis, so to speak.
Right. Coming to you, Mr. Malik, if you look at, again, this period, the remote financial management, I think the traditional practices, the way it was, have also undergone a rethink maybe. So what have been the key changes that have taken part in that part of the finance, scheme of things? In your view, and for CFO, what are the key learnings from this pandemic?
Sure. I think, first of all, very important that, we also have business spreading across India, as also international in many countries. So therefore, having a remote working has been a new learning, if I were to say. And as Mr. Ramesh very rightly said, that, technology has played a very, very important role. I think working virtual meetings, virtual communications, talking with finance teams, having the business reviews, getting the controls, getting the audit done, I think all has been facilitated with the help of technology. When we consider from the finance perspective, I think though the use of technology is very useful here, but the control becomes extremely important, because when people are working remotely, there is always a risk with regard to the data leakage, with regard to the data abuse, etc. So therefore, the control became absolutely essential in this period. And therefore, I think keeping in mind the security, keeping in mind the remote facilitation, ensuring that all the processes, including investors relations, including audit, including board meeting, AGMs, business reviews, etc., are done remotely. So that has been a very big learning. And I think even post-COVID, we will be in a position to leverage these. And also now coming to business side, the digital has played a very, very important and significant role. What we have seen is the e-com business has gone up. We have seen that, the use of WhatsApp, etc., for doing businesses have improved. We have seen the digital communication to launch new products, and as well as getting the feedback has actually improved substantially. And we do see the trend to continue. And thanks to the penetration of communication or telecommunication that has happened even in the urban and rural both areas, has actually helped. Using the platform for online monetary transactions like RTGS or NACH, etc., has also facilitated better control, faster collections, etc. So that has been a very, very positive and a significant change that has happened, and it has been a great learning that we have, and we do see that this will continue. Whether the COVID period is there for long or it's is over, but I think these learnings will certainly improve the productivity, bring in better control, and improve the efficiency.
Right. Mr. Kothari, for you, what have been the key learnings, financial learnings from these takeaways from the last few months?
So I think last few months have been obviously both challenging as well as extremely interesting from a learning perspective. I think one key learning that a lot of us had not really budgeted for was scenarios where business is suddenly going down to zero. You always factored in businesses with 10% sensitivity analysis, 20%, 30% sensitivity analysis, but you never really budgeted for some of these situations where practically economic activity for a large part of the country, across regions, across sectors, comes to a halt. I think so we have obviously now, as part of our budgeting activities, as part of our scenario analysis, also factored some of these situations into account. We have obviously now learned that there are a lot of situations where businesses need to respond. And I think this was one such situation where all the employees got together. Typically, what we've seen is, a lot of times incumbents have some inertia in the system to, adoption of technology or change processes, etc. Because people obviously become comfortable with a certain style of function of working, etc. A very important point which both Mr. Swaminathan and Mr. Malik mentioned was, any finance function would never have imagined doing an audit remotely. But I think every company across the board today in the last 9 months has completed audit without actually large number of them coming face to face with auditors. Auditors themselves would never have been comfortable without actually practically sitting in our offices for at least a week, 10 days, before they sign off on the financials. But I think this kind of a situation, what it's done is it's got everybody together. It's got everybody to collaborate. Typically, what happens is things like AGMs, shareholder meetings, etc. You're constrained because the regulations require you to do certain things. I think the regulator also was extremely proactive, extremely considerate, taking into account the challenges that were there, understanding some of the difficulties which businesses were facing, and ensuring that the requisite changes were being made on a very proactive basis in law itself. I think the single biggest learning for us, out of this whole pandemic, is that you can redesign any process. Nothing is cast in stone. Like Mr. Swaminathan mentioned, a stock take physically was always the status quo. But today we were looking at things like saying that, how can you do it remotely through video, through drones, like he mentioned. So the idea is every process has, been looked at from a 360 perspective and said, can you think about it as if it never existed? And how do you recreate this process in the given constraints that are available?
Right. Mr. Swaminathan, a kind of a similar question to you that it has been a period of learning, unlearning, relearning. So what were the key takeaways from a financial standpoint that Lupin kind of, looked at in the last few months?
Well, lots of things have changed, and potentially a lot of the management principles have actually, leadership principles have actually undergone a change itself. You're now working with teams that you might not necessarily, you don't know them. For example, there are new members of the team who have joined in the last few months, and conventional wisdom tells you that you should actually be interacting a lot with them, getting to know them informally. Knowing somebody physically, in a formal and informal setup is not the same thing as potentially, interacting with somebody on a virtual basis. So these fundamental, premises have actually undergone a change, and that's, it's actually going to, the world is still evolving, and I guess these are newer things that we would learn to adapt with and see how we can actually profess the old management skills that we've all been used to. The second part of the challenge, so to speak, is essentially being on cybersecurity. With so much of things happening, virtually, in terms of emails, in terms of data interchange and the like, cybersecurity becomes extremely important. So, the fundamentals of, getting it all right in terms of backing up data, assessing your vulnerability, quite frequently, that becomes extremely important. And learning to never click on unverified links or attachments or from users that you don't recognize, messages from people that you don't recognize. All these are fundamentals, very very fundamental things, and time and again that needs to be reinforced across the organization. Leaders take a pledge, and you actually make sure that there's a lot of visibility across the entire employee base. So they all are aware of the fact that this could actually lead to pretty disastrous consequences, and that I think is going to be a big challenge going forward. Whilst you're becoming wiser, the fact of the matter is, the hackers of the world are becoming, much more experienced and pretty, pretty sharp at their game that way. And how do you actually stay ahead of the curve? And there's a cost versus benefit. How much do you actually spend in order to reap the benefits, or do we need to keep upping up the game in order to actually not lose out in the long run? These are questions that keep me awake at night.
Right. Mr. Malik, tell me CFO mindset right now in this environment where there is fear, uncertainty, and a little bit of hope at the same time, where we are talking about a vaccine being around the corner, that too, multiple companies. What is the CFO mindset like at this moment, if I could get an understanding?
Sure. I think one thing is that as a CFO, one need to live with uncertainty, number one. Number two, one need to be flexible and agile in its approach. Number three, the business partnership role has become much more significant and important because there are challenges, but there are also opportunities if we are able to explore and capitalize on that, and that needs to be a very big focus as the CFO. And one of the most important thing I think is the cost control, because considering the fact that there have been pressure on the top line, it is important to consider zero-based budgeting and question every line item of the expenditure to see whether this is the best way need to spend, whether we can avoid, whether we can prefer, whether there is a possibility to do it in a better way, and use of automation and technology to maximize the benefit is going to be the key. And also, last but not the least, risk management is going to be the key while managing the business going forward, because let's not forget that even if COVID goes away, then maybe something else will come in. And in today's scenario, the customer preferences, the geographical changes, environmental changes, etc., are making it absolutely essential for having that flexibility and agility. And therefore, in finance, it is important to build the skill set. The team needs to be a learning team. The organization needs to be a learning organization, which needs to keep on upskilling its own capabilities to manage these businesses and have a competitive edge.
Right. Mr. Kothari, the behavioral changes that consumers have undergone in the last few months, from a perspective of a business owner and somebody who leads it, is there a fear that these changes may be reversible after the pandemic? Are you basing your strategies permanently on this? Are you open to changes later on? How is it at an organizational level?
So I think very interesting question you asked, Rohil. There are few changes which definitely are, here to stay. I think, if I were to talk about some of them, ed tech, the concept of, having technology being used in education has seen a quantum leap. That's here to stay. There are, certain changes which are reversible. I think there is a fear right now which is prohibiting a large number of us from traveling, for reasons, from going out to restaurants, to hotels. I think, from an organization perspective, we're extremely optimistic because we see that there is a huge pent up demand. I mean, a lot of people have used terms like revenge spending, revenge tourism, and where people are just itching to go out. I think the first signs of the vaccine, at a large scale distribution, we'll see that, I think from our perspective, we think that the next few years, we'll see a huge upsurge because this whole pent up demand is just waiting to get unleashed. I mean, there is a lot of fear right now, which is holding back this demand. And at the same time, I mean, when we talk to certain retailers and we understand from them, they tell us that there is a lot of resurgence which is coming. Rural, when I speak to some of the folks, that deal, is very resilient in these times. I mean, rural demand is pretty strong. It's not seen as much of a contraction as the urban demand is. I think urban is more because there is a sudden shift in consumer patterns of spending. Travel has been curtailed, so a lot of the industries which were dependent on people stepping out. A lot of, let's say, purchases which were impulse purchases have kind of stopped. But what our sense is that we will see a resurgence in demand post COVID, which will be unprecedented. There will be a huge resurgence in the economic activity, which will have a domino effect, which will really have an upliftment because you have a situation wherein demand has been suppressed artificially. If you look at it, I mean, we like to break it as the bottom half, the top segment and the middle segment. The top is largely, not impacted because their ability to withstand some of these shocks is extremely high. The bottom is also largely not impacted because, I mean, while they are impacted, there is a lot of, people who had to, migrate, etc. But the rural economy largely, like we like to call it, has not really seen that much of issues. The middle is where the pain is right now. But the middle class is, I think, in my opinion, itching to spend as and when, let's say, the economic activity or let's say the economic environment allows them to step out.
Right. Mr. Swaminathan, to you the same question, but in a very different perspective, because your sector is unlike many others in the sense that there's a lot of opportunity for you as well, right? If I'm correct. So are you also basing your long-term strategy? How are you basing your long-term strategy? Because there's a sudden spike in the way consumers are behaving. But what if post-pandemic, how are you kind of navigating this period? And what is the long-term strategy going to be? What will be the basis of that strategy? That's my question.
Yeah, I would certainly talk about my company or for that matter, my sector. But before that, let me also say, whilst I heard Deepak saying what he did, I have a slightly different view. I think there'll be, the recovery will potentially not necessarily be V-shaped. It could be U-shaped in some ways. It's in fact, and K-shaped in some other ways, because K-shaped, what I meant was essentially a lot of well-run companies would obviously find the going pretty good. They're kind of resilient and they would make it pretty good in a short time. But there are a lot of other companies who are less than marginal in the way they went about it, and then potentially those companies would fall by the wayside because they've been impacted hugely, and to the extent that's certainly going to impact the economy itself. And speaking about, in fact, the sector, so to speak, I think yes, the sector has been on a roll for some time. There's going to be a lot more consciousness of health and, of course, medicines and the like. But speaking about the same, in fact, as I see it, prescriptions and demand have actually been lower across various parts of the globe, especially when it comes to acute therapy, because people have been putting off, spending monies on, on illnesses that might last for a few days only. Well, of course, chronic is still on, and those by heart and diabetic and the like, they obviously are spending. And again, the reason is that whilst people are not stepping out, that obviously means that they're not necessarily been impacted by flu or, and this is across the globe, actually. This is a phenomenon that has been recorded by the entire healthcare sector, so to speak. The other thing which also strikes me is the fact that this digital march is going to be here forever. So there's a lot of and that I think is going to be the task of the CFO, aggregating information that he has not done before. They've always been responsible for, in fact, repositories created by SAP and a host of other conventional systems. You have the old contemporary core, but you now have going to have a new digital core coming in from a lot of things that you undertake at various other paths, including, for example, factories. You add your SCADA and PLC systems and so on. You would actually be supplementing that with a host of other sensors and other technologies to capture signals in order to actually work on things like, say, for example, predictive analytics for predictive maintenance, prescriptive maintenance. So, or potentially something like, for example, working on signals for capturing the golden batches, things which are out of trends, things that are out of specifications and the like, to make manufacturing a lot more efficient. So those companies that are actually taking the strides and are and prove to be successful would certainly last a long run. And there would be a host of others who don't take this up and potentially lose out. But as Lalit and others were saying, it is obviously going to be a lot of emphasis on efficiencies, on cost reduction, and of course assimilating technologies for making our entire business paradigm very different from what it was in the past.
Right. I have two more questions to all of you. One is, I'll start with Mr. Malik. This period has also been, the last 9 months, the period of deep rethink for organizations, and a lot of financial practices being kind of subject to a closer observation. Many myths have been busted in this process as well. If I had to ask you, Mr. Malik, what were some of the myths that got busted during this period, financial practices that no longer stay relevant in your view during this rethink period? Are there any in your view?
Sure. I think first of all, which has also been covered by my other colleagues, that having the physical meetings, that need that you need to travel, you need to have the physical meetings. So that was considered as an essential. I think in this lockdown, one has realized that you can use technology, and that's not that relevant. And including the fact that even if you were to complete your statutory audit, your stock take, etc., it is possible to use technology and still ensure that there is a proper control and true and fair view can be given. So I think that has been one of the big learning that is there. Number two is that you cannot take the environment and the future for granted, because you can't consider very concrete plan for a long-term period of 3 to 5 years or so unless and until you inbuilt the flexibility to modify and be agile in terms of your approach and converting the challenge into opportunity. So I think looking at micro level management and control becomes essential than only considering as the macro level. So that has been another very important learning that we have. Number three is that technology penetration is not just a support function, but at times it is going to lead the way the operations or the way the business is going to run. So I think there has been a lot of strategic investments on digital and technology that is taking place, which is earlier the scenario which I just talked about, that we were using erstwhile check collections and check payment deposits. Now we are talking about RTGS and NACH and doing away with all the checks, collection, preparations, reconciliation, etc. I think has been a very good step forward taking. From finance point of view, it is not just the reporting or the statutory compliance that is relevant. It is more analytical support to business that has become important. So it's a business decision support that is important, and using AI and RPA in the technological way to predict the future and have the alternatives has become very important. So these are the changes which has made it mandatory, and as a result of it, I would say a very important learning is that though experience is very important, no doubt about it, but the learning ability and to adapt to the changes and converting challenges into opportunities has become the key skill or the key requirement in the finance organization. So therefore, though importance of experience is very much there, but the ability to learn, the ability to convert challenge into opportunity, the ability to upskill oneself has become the key talent requirement in the current environment. So these have been the kind of learnings or the changes that has resulted. And also be open-minded in terms of adopting to the new ways, new challenges, and new solutions and suggestions. I think that has been another very, very important learning that we have seen.
Thank you, Mr. Malik, for very important points that you have put forth. I want to go to Mr. Kothari that before COVID and after COVID, what were some of the practices or some of the truths about or myths about the market that you saw are no longer relevant?
So I think before COVID, we kind of had certain assumptions about how the markets would behave in terms of small businesses and what are the kind of cash flows that typically businesses would see, etc. I think post COVID, we have obviously aligned our algorithms and models to take into account facts that there could be certain shocks, and there is a probability and a possibility, like the other panelists have mentioned, that today we've had COVID. I mean, there is nothing saying that we should not prepare for something else which could potentially come tomorrow.
Right.
The idea is that we have obviously learned from the fact that there could be these events which could have sweeping changes across sectors, across geographies, and are not, let's say, within the control of the business themselves. And we will need to assist them, we will need to support them, and we will need to work together with them in terms of the whole process. I think the single biggest change, in my opinion, from some of these events, demonetization was one such black swan event, which was obviously a decision taken by a government. Obviously, COVID is something which has been handed to us. This is a pandemic. It's obviously a situation which is, I think, broken down mental barriers. Every organization has a lot of things whereby people say, "Oh, this we can't do," or "This we can't do without." And what COVID has done is made everybody realize you can do without everything and you can do without anything. You have to think from scratch, and you have to be open to changing the way either you've been doing something or the presence of something or the absence of something. So I think that, to my mind, is the single biggest change, the mindset shift, which otherwise is very difficult for organizations to bring in sometimes. Requires a lot of investment of time, management, leadership time in trying to get people to look at it from a different perspective. I think an external factor like this only just pushes everybody together, closer, huddled together, thinking together, breaks down barriers, breaks down walls, breaks down differences between departments, teams, and helps everybody push in one single direction, which is forward. So I think that, to me, is truly the single biggest gift that COVID has given to every organization.
I think you're right. I think we would always keep in mind it has become part of our psyche permanently that some things which could take place as big as COVID, and I think we'll always keep some space for that now on in our strategies. Mr. Swaminathan, for you, what has been the biggest myths that have got a relook, in your view, that were the permanent part of business strategy, but no longer relevant. Are there any in your view that in your sector?
I think two things have become very important. So firstly, a lot of us actually have been using data more for supporting current decisions. Just like a drunkard on a road actually uses lampposts for potentially supporting rather than for showing him the way. Now we are using data for potentially moving things forward. So essentially that's data analytics for you. So that comes in its wake, and it takes into its wake a host of things. It's potentially from predictive analytics for maintenance to a host of other things, including R&D and the like. The second bit, I think, which has changed is essentially a lot of us have actually heard of contingency planning or been practicing it and the like, but this we have really applied it in real life today. The second part after that is essentially we are now working on a lot of scenario plans. We know that the business cycles have become much smaller than ever before, and to that extent, you need to be prepared for everything. Black swan events of various kinds, digital disruptions, potentially business paradigm changes, and the like are going to be a lot more frequent. And we realize that because with the advent of technologies, a lot of things are becoming passive that way. To that extent, scenario planning becomes extremely important. And that's exactly what we are trying to do in terms of looking at the ground shifting from under our feet, and how do we respond to that proactively and still keep our heads above water.
Right. Great. Well, lovely. I have 5 minutes. Last question, quick question to all of you. I'll come to you. Mr. Malik, I want to start with you that going from here, wherein the COVID is around and third wave is around and there are predictions about another lockdown or whatever, what would be your advice to all people who are watching us, who are mostly from the finance background, how to tide over this challenging phase as we get into another side of it? What would be your advice to them? Quick.
Yeah. I think first and foremost will be to take care of your health. I think that's what I would say, irrespective of whatever function one is, because I think that has become the most important priority for everybody now. Besides that, I think I would say that one thing is that we need to be ready for change, and I think open mindset, being flexible, and I think speed of execution is going to be another very important aspect in any business decision and in any business execution is going to be there. And as a finance function, I would suggest that use of technology to improve productivity, increase speed, on improve better control is going to be the key important areas in finance. And as I always talk about, now 5 C's to be the top priority, which is control, cost reduction, consistency, compliance, and communication is going to be the priority in any role of finance that a person is working. And last but not the least, and very important, finance function has to be a business partner and a business support function by ensuring the corporate governance is not compromised, and helping the stakeholder value to increase. So I think that needs to be the prime focus of the finance function. And within that, one needs to use my 5 C's principles to deliver the better results by use of technology and increasing the speed of execution.
Right. Mr. Kothari, quick words from you, and then Mr. Swaminathan.
Just like to add one more C to what Mr. Malik said, which is collaboration.
Excellent. Yes.
I think in today's time, finance as a function needs to collaborate. I think a lot of times what has happened typically is finance has been, kind of like the gatekeeper in terms of budgets, in terms of for a lot of other aspects. I think now increasingly in these times, the collaborative function becomes extremely critical.
Right. Mr. Swaminathan.
Saying that one thing which is extremely important for CFOs to do is essentially to keep communicating both internally and externally. Internally, so that you actually are aware of what's happening around. The employees are aware, and there is no panic, or there is people are generally conscious of what is happening around. The second part is, of course, communicating to the external world as well, especially your stakeholders, your shareholders, so that I think it's extremely important because the last thing that people really want is surprises. To make sure that the communication channels are on, you tell them about what's happening around and your own sentiments about the future, and people are appreciative of what's happening around, what's happening to you. That is
right. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Malik, Mr. Kothari, and Mr. Swaminathan for your time. Been a great conversation, and hope to have many more. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Ray.
you. Thanks, and stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Thank you so much, our session chair, Ruhail, for this wonderful session. And thanks again to all our speakers.